Rain hits the windows of Casa Moretti the way it has for 12 years, steady, indifferent, like it has somewhere else to be, and Milan is just a stop along the way. Inside, the bar is dim gold, ice cracks against crystal. Marco Moretti sits where he always sits, in the chair that faces the door, because a man in his line of work never turns his back on an entrance. Except this one entrance leads nowhere but memory. You should know who Marco Moretti is before you know anything else about this night. In this city, his name is not spoken twice in the same conversation. Once is a warning, twice is an invitation to trouble you don't want. 7 years ago, 3 rival families tried to carve up his territory while he was still grieving. None of them are in business anymore. His wife's funeral was closed casket. The official story was that the fire had taken too much for anyone to bear looking at. He didn't argue. He didn't ask to see her. Some part of him has spent 12 years grateful he didn't. He pours the whiskey himself. He always has. 2 fingers, no ice. The same brand Isabella used to tease him for never switching up. He doesn't notice the pattern in that anymore. Grief that old stops feeling like grief. It just feels like Tuesday. Behind him, near the far wall, a woman moves a mop in slow practice circles. She's been on staff 8 months. The others barely look at her. A pregnant janitor in a uniform 2 sizes too big isn't worth the attention in a room built for men who measure worth in fear. Marco has walked past her perhaps 400 times. He has never once really looked at her. And that, you should understand, is the whole tragedy sitting quietly in this room tonight. Not the rain, not the whiskey, not even the empire built around this man like a fortress of his own making. It's that 12 years of looking straight through someone is its own kind of burial. She glances at him now, the way she does every night at this exact hour, when his shoulders drop half an inch and his jaw goes somewhere far away. Tonight, something in her face doesn't hold. Her eyes fill fast and silent, and she turns back to the floor before he can catch it. Though he wouldn't have. He never does. Her sleeve has ridden up an inch at the wrist. Just an inch. Just enough. There, pale against her skin, runs a thin ridge of old scar tissue, the kind a body keeps long after a memory's been told to forget. She tugs the fabric back down before the light catches it properly. Outside, the rain keeps falling on a city that buried a woman 12 years ago and never once asked to see her face. To understand the man drinking alone in that bar, you have to go back to the night his world detonated, almost literally. 12 years ago, on a road outside Milan slicked with late autumn rain, Isabella Moretti's car went off the embankment and into a ravine. By the time anyone reached it, fire had already done what fire does. The investigators who arrived called it an accident, a fuel leak, a spark, terrible luck. Marco was 300 kilometers away in a hospital bed, his own body wrecked from an ambush 2 nights prior when the call came through. He didn't see the wreckage. He didn't see her. He signed papers a lawyer placed in front of him and was told the remains were too damaged for an open casket. He believed it because the alternative, that there was something to question, was a door he didn't have the strength to open, so he never opened it. That's the detail worth sitting with. A man who built an empire on controlling every variable in his world never once asked who actually identified that body, or why the investigation closed in 9 days, or why the one man who handled the entire affair on his behalf rose, within a year, from lieutenant to the most trusted name beside Marco's own. Grief, when it has nowhere to go, doesn't disappear. It hardens into something useful. In the months after Isabella's funeral, Marco Moretti stopped being a man who ran a business and became a man who ran a reckoning. The 3 families who tried to move on his territory while he buried his wife learned that mercy had died alongside her. Within a year, men who once called him reasonable stopped using that word at all. He told himself it was strength. It was easier than telling himself it was the only language left for a man who couldn't say the word guilt out loud. No one around him benefited from his suspicion because he never had any. And that, more than the fire, more than the rain that night, more than the closed casket lowered into ground he never visited again, was the real inheritance Isabella's death left behind. Somewhere in that quiet acceptance, somebody else's fortune was made. Her name, according to the papers tucked in a drawer beside her bed, is Elena Conti. The accent she uses, soft, vaguely southern, careful, took her 3 years to perfect. It isn't hers. Nothing on that ID is hers, not really, except the photograph. And even that was taken after enough had changed about her face that she sometimes doesn't recognize herself in mirrors anymore. So she avoids them. Every mirror in the staff quarters, every reflective surface in Casa Moretti, every camera angle she's mapped in her head like a woman diffusing something live. She knows exactly where the security feeds don't reach, because she spent the first 3 months of this job learning the blind spots the way other people learn a new city's streets. The other staff call her things behind cupped hands, La Straniera, the slow one, the one who flinches when a door slams too hard. They don't know that flinching kept her alive for over a decade. They see a tired, pregnant woman mopping floors in a uniform that doesn't fit, and they decide that's the whole of her. People rarely look past what's convenient to see. Elena has built a life on exactly that mercy. Twice a month, in the bathroom of a one-room apartment with bare walls and not a single photograph anywhere. Not of a wedding, not of a husband, not of the life she used to have. She opens a box of drugstore dye 2 shades darker than what God gave her, and she paints over the truth at the roots before it has a chance to show. It's a small ritual. It costs her 12 euros and an hour she doesn't have. It is also, some nights, the only thing standing between her and a man 12 feet away recognizing his own wife. The walls have nothing on them because photographs are evidence, and evidence is the one thing she cannot afford to leave behind, even in a home no one else has ever entered. She is 28 weeks along now. The exhaustion sits in her differently than it did the first time. Heavier, slower, laced with a fear that has nothing to do with childbirth and everything to do with timing. She had a plan once. Disappear until it was safe. Stay gone until the people who buried her stopped looking. 12 years should have been enough. It wasn't. The man who orchestrated her disappearance is still inside these walls, still trusted, still close enough to Marco to end her with a single phone call. And now there is a child coming who will need a hospital, a birth certificate, a future that can't survive on forged paperwork, and 12 euro dye boxes forever. Tonight, alone in the stairwell behind the kitchen, she presses her palm flat against the curve of her stomach and feels the small, insistent motion underneath. A child who doesn't know yet what world he's about to enter. "I'm out of time," she whispers, to no one, to the dark, to the version of herself that used to believe 12 years would be enough to make this safe. It wasn't a question. It was a countdown she'd been avoiding since the day the second line appeared on a test she bought under a name that isn't hers. There is exactly 1 hour of Marco Moretti's day that belongs to no one. Not his men, not his enemies, not the empire that demands the rest of him without apology. It happens after midnight, when the bar empties and the staff thin out, and somehow, without either of them ever agreeing to it, Elena is always the last one still moving through the room. He never invited her to stay. She never asked permission. It simply became the shape of things. Marco at his usual chair, Elena finishing her work 2 tables away, close enough that the silence between them stopped being empty and started being something else neither of them named. The first time he'd poured her a drink months ago, he hadn't planned to. His hand had simply reached for a second glass before his mind caught up with the gesture. She'd taken it without surprise, like she'd been expecting it her whole life, and something in him, some old, buried instinct, had quieted at the sight of her holding it. He doesn't confide in her. Marco Moretti doesn't confide in anyone. That particular muscle atrophied 12 years ago, along with most of his capacity for trust. But there's a difference between speaking and being witnessed, and what happens in that hour is witnessing. He sits with his ghosts in front of her the way he sits with them in front of no one else, unguarded by half a degree, which for a man like him might as well be naked. She watches him grieve a woman she knows better than anyone alive, and she says nothing, because saying anything would end everything. Small things pass between them that neither acknowledges. He holds his glass the same way he always has, 2 fingers and a thumb, the rim tilted slightly before it reaches his mouth, a habit from a marriage he doesn't know is standing 3 feet away. Some nights, when he lifts his glass in a silent half-toast to no one, she finishes the words in her head a half-second before he doesn't say them out loud, to getting through it. It was their toast once, in another life, in a kitchen that doesn't exist anymore. Tonight, as she sets a fresh glass in front of him, her sleeve catches on the bar's edge and rides up just slightly. Her hand, the curve of her knuckles, the particular way her fingers wrap around the bottle's neck, catches his eye for the first time in 8 months of nights like this one. Something pulls tight in his chest, brief and unplaceable, like a name on the tip of his tongue that won't surface. He looks away before the thought finishes forming. It's grief, he tells himself. Grief makes a man see ghosts in strangers' hands. It's nothing. It's the whiskey. It's 12 years of looking for her in every room he's ever stood in. He doesn't look again. She pours herself something smaller, sits where she always sits, and the rain keeps falling outside a window neither of them is watching anymore. Salvatore Russo has worked for the Moretti family for 15 years, and in that time he has learned one rule above all others. The body remembers what the mind has agreed to forget. He doesn't know why the new janitor unsettles him. At first, he wrote it off as instinct doing what instinct does, flagging an unfamiliar face in a house built on familiar ones. But instinct, when you've survived this long in this business, is rarely wrong, and lately his eyes keep finding her without his permission. It's the wrist that does it. 3 nights ago, reaching to wipe down the bar, her sleeve slid up far enough for him to catch a flash of old scar tissue along the inside of her forearm. Pale, thin, the kind left by something far worse than a kitchen accident. He's seen a scar like that exactly once before, on a body he helped carry out of a ravine 12 years ago, on a night that ended his innocence about a great many things in this family. He tells himself it's nothing. Scars like that aren't rare. But then there's the way she startles at raised voices, the way she angles her body slightly away from every camera in the room, like she's done it so many times it's no longer a choice. And 3 nights ago, when Marco called out for someone to bring fresh ice, she answered before he finished the sentence, with a name that wasn't her own. Coming, and then nothing. The word swallowed so fast that anyone not listening for it would have missed it entirely. Salvatore was listening for it. He starts watching her properly after that. Not staring. He's better than that. Just noting. The way she holds a glass. The way her hand moves to her stomach when she thinks no one's looking. Not the way pregnant women usually do, but like she's protecting something more specific than a child. The way she never once, in 8 months on staff has let anyone photograph her for the employee files, always citing some excuse: a migraine, a broken camera, a meeting she's late for. He remembers another woman who hated cameras. He remembers a night with rain like tonight's, and a car that went off the road outside the city, and the particular specific job he'd been assigned to do before any official investigator arrived at the scene. He remembers being told the matter was handled, that loyalty meant not asking further questions, and he remembers who told him that. Tonight, he watches Elena from across the bar as she sets a glass in front of Marco with hands that shake just slightly more than exhaustion should account for, and the certainty that's been building in him for 3 nights finally settles into something he can no longer talk himself out of. He steps into the corridor outside the kitchen, away from the cameras whose blind spots he too knows intimately, and pulls out his phone. The man he calls answers on the second ring, a voice warm, familiar, trusted by everyone in this house, including the man it's about to betray. "It's Salvatore," he says quietly. "We need to talk. It's about the janitor." A pause stretches on the other end of the line, just half a second too long to be nothing. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, the voice says. Salvatore doesn't see the way the man's face changes the moment the call disconnects. Doesn't see the flicker of something cold and calculating cross features that have spent 12 years perfecting the look of grief shared, of loyalty proven, of a friend who never left Marco Moretti's side through the worst tragedy of his life. He doesn't see it. But you do. To understand what Elena is hiding from, you have to go back to a night even Marco doesn't fully know. The real one, not the version written into a closed investigation 12 years ago. She remembers the road, she remembers the rain and the impact, and a fire that wasn't an accident at all, but something carefully arranged by a man who'd spent years building Marco's trust, precisely so he could one day spend it. Renzo Bianchi, consigliere, confidant, the man who delivered Marco's eulogy at a funeral for a woman who wasn't in the casket, had orchestrated the entire night with the precision of someone who understood that the only way to take an empire from Marco Moretti was to first take everything that made him human. She survived. Barely. A passing truck driver pulled her from the wreckage before the fire fully claimed the car, and what followed were months in a private clinic 200 kilometers from Milan, her face and body rebuilt by surgeons paid in silence, her identity as Isabella Moretti deliberately, surgically erased. She was 4 months pregnant at the time with their first child. She lost that baby in the same hospital bed where she learned from a man Renzo sent to protect her exactly what would happen if she ever tried to go home. "Marco doesn't know what I know," the man had told her, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "He thinks you're dead, and that grief is the only thing keeping him from looking too closely at the men around him. The moment he learns you're alive, he starts asking who lied to him. And Renzo cannot survive that conversation. Neither can you. Neither, Isabella, can he." She believed it. She has spent 12 years believing it, rebuilding herself into Elena Conti one forged document at a time, taking jobs that kept her invisible, moving twice before finally, stupidly, she sometimes thinks, taking a position in the one house in Milan she should have run from on sight. She told herself it was the safest place to watch from a distance. She told herself a great many things to make staying near him feel like wisdom instead of what it actually was. And then came the nights at the bar, the whiskey, the silence that felt impossibly like home. And then came a single night 8 months ago that neither of them has spoken of since, a night that left her carrying a second child, conceived not in the marriage everyone believes is over, but in whatever this strange, unnamed thing between them has quietly become. She can hide a scar under a sleeve. She cannot hide a child forever. Across the city, in a car idling outside Casa Moretti, Renzo Bianchi listens to Salvatore's voice describe a scar, a flinch, a swallowed name, and something far worse than suspicion moves through him. He has spent 12 years certain the woman he buried would stay buried. He did not plan for a pregnancy. He did not plan for proof that would not simply identify her, but date itself precisely to a window of time that places her inside Casa Moretti alive for the better part of a year. His hand tightens on the steering wheel. Whatever happens next, he decides, it has to happen before that child is born. Renzo arrives at midnight. He doesn't come through the front. He comes the way he always has. Quiet, trusted, a man who's never once needed to knock on a door in this house. Salvatore meets him in the corridor, already talking, already certain he's done the loyal thing. Renzo isn't listening anymore. He's already decided what tonight requires. Inside the bar, the storm has picked up. Rain slams the windows now, instead of falling on them. Marco sits where he always sits. Elena moves where she always moves. Except tonight her hands won't stop shaking, and she doesn't know yet that the decision has already been made for her. 20 feet away, in a hallway she can't see. Renzo steps into the doorway. He doesn't say much. He doesn't need to. He says enough. A name, a question about a scar, a comment dressed up as concern, to make Marco's head turn toward Elena with a slowness that feels suddenly like the room has dropped 10 degrees. Elena freezes. Marco looks at her, really looks, the way he hasn't in 8 months, the way he hasn't in 12 years. Her hand goes to her stomach. Old instinct. Protect what's inside before anything else. The glass slips from Marco's fingers. It doesn't shatter right away. For one impossible second, it simply falls, end over end, whiskey arcing gold through lamplight, and in that second, something in Marco's mind does the same thing, falls, end over end, 12 years of grief rearranging itself into a shape he can no longer refuse to see. The glass hits the floor. The sound is small. The silence after it is not. Elena doesn't move. She can't. Renzo is still standing in the doorway, his face arranged into something like concern, like a man who only wants to protect his oldest friend. And for one terrible heartbeat, she thinks she has run out of road entirely. Then she looks at Marco. And whatever 12 years of survival taught her about staying silent, about staying hidden, about staying safe, all of it gives way to something older than fear. Marco. Her voice barely makes it across the room. You promised you'd never leave me alone. Nobody breathes. Renzo's expression doesn't change, but something behind his eyes does. The recognition of a man watching 12 years of careful work come apart in 4 words he can't take back. Marco doesn't speak. He doesn't move toward her. He simply stares. And in his face, you can see a man trying to hold 2 truths that cannot both be real. That his wife is dead. That his wife is standing in front of him with rain-damp hair and a stomach round with a child he didn't know was his. The storm outside doesn't pause for any of it. It just keeps coming down, indifferent, the way it has for 12 years. It's Renzo who breaks first. He takes 1 step backward, toward the door, toward an exit that no longer exists for him. And Marco, without looking away from Elena, says a single word that ends whatever Renzo still believes he can survive. Stay. What happens to Renzo Bianchi in the hour that follows is not something this story needs to show you in detail. Marco Moretti has spent 12 years building a reputation on what happens to men who betray him. You already know the shape of it without being shown the edges. What matters is what doesn't happen. There's no shouting, no spectacle. Marco doesn't raise his voice once. He simply looks at the man he called brother for over a decade. The man who delivered a eulogy for a wife who was alive in a hospital bed 200 kilometers away. The man who let him bury an empty casket and build 12 years of grief on a lie. And something in his face goes quieter and colder than anyone in that room has ever seen. Salvatore, standing frozen by the door, understands before anyone explains it to him exactly what he's just walked into, and exactly which side of this he should have questioned years ago. Renzo Bianchi doesn't leave Casa Moretti that night. What conversation passes between him and Marco stays behind a closed door, and by morning, his name belongs to the past tense in every sense that matters in this world. Marco doesn't go looking for Elena until it's over. When he finds her, she's exactly where she's always been at this hour, sitting in the chair across from his, the one she's occupied in silence for 8 months without ever being invited to. Except tonight, there's no mop beside her, no uniform 2 sizes too big doing the work of making her invisible. Just a woman, finally seen, with 12 years of running settled somewhere behind her eyes alongside something that might, carefully, be relief. He doesn't ask the questions you'd expect, not yet. There will be time for why didn't you come home and how could you let me grieve you? Those conversations are still ahead of them, and they won't be easy. Tonight, he simply crosses the room, kneels in front of her chair the way he hasn't knelt in front of anything in 12 years, and rests his hand, slowly, over hers, over the curve of a stomach carrying a child he didn't know existed until an hour ago. She doesn't flinch this time. "I'm here," he says, and it isn't an apology, and it isn't an answer. It's a promise finally kept. 12 years too late and exactly on time. Outside, the rain begins to ease, the way storms do once they've said what they came to say. Here's what this story leaves you with. If you've stayed until the end, somewhere in your own life, there may be someone standing close enough to touch, dismissed as background, as invisible, as not worth a second look. And you may not find out until years later exactly what you failed to see. Marco Moretti spent 12 years mourning a woman who poured his whiskey every single night, 3 feet away, waiting, not for rescue, but simply for him to look up.